Thank you very much for joining us on your Tuesday evening. I'm Sophie Gordon from Cycling UK, and part of what I do on off-road access work involves creating long-distance adventures, which is great fun. And I'm sure a lot of you have probably heard of Cycling UK, might be long-standing members from when it was the Cyclist Touring Club. And if you haven't heard of us, then we're basically the UK's cycling charity, trying to make the world better by getting more people riding bikes and inspiring people to discover the joy of cycling, which I think everybody here understands quite well. And I'm kindly joined today by Guy Kesteven, who used to be an archaeologist, now a mountain bike writer, and wrote the route guide for King Alfred's Way. So he's pretty much the expert on all 10,000 years of history for the route. No pressure, Guy.
Oh, no, yeah, thanks for that, Sophie. Yeah, no pressure at all. I mean, I'd just like to point out, I wrote the guidebook, but I didn't set up the route. That absolute work of genius is mainly Kieran Foster at Cycling UK, who put together the route. Kieran's an old friend of mine from up in Yorkshire and an absolute map addict. I'm fairly bad, but Kieran takes it to a whole different level.
Yeah, so we owe him the gratitude for putting the whole thing together. So in terms of how we're going to go, I'll start off and introduce the background to the route and how we put it together. And then Guy and I will take you on a little virtual tour around the route for about half an hour or so we can leave lots of time for questions at the end. So yeah, if you do think of any questions while we're going through, stick them in that Q&A box and we'll try and get through as many as we can. So here we go, King Alfred's Way. It's a 220-mile or 350-kilometre off-road adventure route around the heart of historic Wessex, which was the Anglo-Saxon kingdom of King Alfred the Great, hence the name. And it just joins together lots of really fascinating historical places, and you've got a huge range from kind of Stonehenge and Iron Age hill forts right through to World War II defensive structures. So just this massive time span. And of course, loads of stunning scenery and views and wildlife and quaint little English villages along the way. So it's a real kind of mixed bag. So to kind of give you a little more of a flavour of the route, I've got a short video to show you, and then we can talk about it in a bit more detail.
Well, I mean, that sort of tile there just shows how many people it's been picked up by as well. I mean, GCN, which is one of the largest internet channels on cycling in the world, have already picked up on it. Loads of other people have done it. The Facebook forum has been really, really busy. So the engagement on it's been great, hasn't it, Sophie?
Yeah, and it was great to hear in the first talk on Friday night. Tim Milliken just mentioned, oh yes, and one of my adventures last year was doing King Alfred's Way, and I thought, oh, brilliant. Yes, it's been great to see people getting right out on it. And then, Guy, what attracted you to it when we asked you to write the guide?
Well, interesting. I was curious. I mean, as an archaeologist, I know kind of all the western part of the route. I went on field trips when I was at college down to Stonehenge and Avebury and places like that, distant memories. But hearing about how you're going to take it basically right under the nose of London and Reading, past the M3 and a load of other motorways, and still making it an enjoyable route. And the really interesting dynamic was, of course, when I was initially planning and writing the guidebook and trying to get words on paper because we didn't know when lockdown was going to lift, it was all done on a mixture of Google Earth and the OS maps, online OS maps. So you could see these little corridors that Kieran had put together of bridleways and cycle paths and things like that. But it was like keyhole surgery. What he'd done was, and what was incredible, when we luckily lockdown lifted just in time for me to get out there and put a 3-day recce ride in. But what was amazing was the sense of isolation and kind of wildness, even in these incredibly densely populated areas. And you kind of expect it out on Salisbury Plain or on the Ridgeway, or, that's where you expect to have that amazing sort of, solitude and, really feel the history and everything. But even when you were, literally within earshot of a major road, if you just closed your ear on that side, you were still in this amazing old medieval covered gravel way. There's one bit which I keep always bring up when Sophie and I chat, where you come out of Reading through a very modern industrial estate and sort of science park, cross over a motorway, do a couple of little back roads, cross a massive kind of six lane junction or something on traffic lights, and you just get to this, and your little GPS tells you to just dive right down what looks like, and it looks like fly tipping paradise. And it's like, really? But like a minute, and so you go, well, it's what the route says. And a minute later, you're just this an amazing tunnel of trees. And just, you could be, if you can shut out that, there's still a bit of road noise, but just the isolation you get there. And other places like Frensham Common, and just amazing. I mean, they filmed, I think Kieran was telling me, they filmed part of Skyfall. The bit at the end of Skyfall, the James Bond movie, where they're all meant to be in a house up on the Scottish Highlands, that was actually filmed on Frensham Common. So there's, and just when you're up there, there are literally millions of people within a few kilometres of you, but all you can see is this beautiful heather and these rolling hills, and you literally cannot see any of it. There's a few tall buildings poking out about 15 miles away, which is the centre of London. But the solitude and the wildness and the sort of escape and freedom that fills you with, even when it's right on the doorstep of some of the busiest places in England. Just amazing. I think that's my overall takeaway from it. So I was fascinated how Kieran managed to achieve that, and I was blown away. And also the quality of riding. I thought it would just be a nice join the dots of really interesting, historical places I wanted to go and see, places I was fascinated with from an archaeological point of view, whether, like you say, it's Neolithic tombs or whether it's defensive lines from World War II or even later. But the actual riding was really fun. You've got stream crossings, you've got river crossings, you've got some quite technical descents, you've got some little challenge climbs. But I mean, the whole thing is rideable on a wide variety of bikes and with a wide variety of skill sets as well. There's a couple of places where people will probably push for comfort, but it is all rideable. But there's so much different landscape and topography coming under your wheels and sort of coming into all your senses. I mean, it's just such a rich experience. That's my takeaway from it, really.
Yeah, definitely. And we'll go on to kind of cover some of those as we go around. I'll pop back to the map. I think, what you were saying really sums up kind of the way we approach this. So it all started kind of 2 or 3 years ago when Cycling UK helped to put together a rideable route for the North Downs Way National Trail, which goes from Farnham in Surrey over to Dover in Kent. And there isn't currently a kind of official cycle all the way along route like there is for the South Downs Way, because parts of the North Downs Way are footpaths. So we thought, oh, well, can we kind of link up parallel bridle ways and byways around the footpath sections to make a route that you can ride all the way along? So we did that, and then people got really excited about it, and we thought, oh, this is brilliant. People are quite keen on these long distance off-road trails. So then the King Alfred's Way area kind of seemed to be a logical confluence of several long distance routes. As you saw in the video, it links with the South Downs Way and the North Downs Way and the rideable bits of the Thames Path and the Ridgeway. So we thought, well, okay, we could use a bit of the South Downs Way and use a bit of the Ridgeway, and there are various other trails shorter trails along the way. And then, as Guy was saying, find all these little snickety bits and just tie them together to create this wider experience. So yeah, we'll give you a bit of a flavour of it as we go around. So we kick off in Winchester at the historic Westgate, which is a pretty impressive starting point, I think. And then, Guy, do you want to talk a bit about the importance of Winchester?
Oh, well, it's the cradle of the Anglo-Saxon kingdom, really, which became the English kingdom. I mean, it wasn't where Alfred stopped the Vikings. They'd actually come a bit further east by that point. He stopped. There is good evidence that he stopped them. From literally by hiding in the marshes of Somerset. They were already raiding as far as Exeter, but that became his kind of symbolic capital for the pushback against the Vikings. And it stayed a really, really important, centre for local rule and sort of national importance all the way through the medieval period, both royal and monastic. It's always been a massive source of power for the whole south of England. So, I mean, and, you've got the beautiful cathedrals and museums and all sorts of, definitely get there early or leave some time before you leave to have a good look around Winchester. It is a lovely place to start and a lovely place to explore around.
Yeah, definitely. And I think the brilliant thing is, you come out of your impressive historical structures and sort of straight away it feels like you're out of town and onto these lovely lanes and gravel tracks, and out into the countryside straight away. So then you continue on a little bit further and you end up at Old Sarum, which is an enormous Iron Age hill fort, which is really quite impressive. I hadn't been there before. And yeah, it's just fantastic. Great view down into Salisbury. And you can actually cycle right up a very steep road up to the centre of it, and have a look right around the middle. Is there anything you wanted to, any
I was just going to say,
you want to add there?
And even when you're rolling into Old Sarum, you're going along the line of a Roman road. I think it's actually called the Roman Road in one of the villages you go through. So you come straight out of Winchester, you're more or less you're on a quiet country road for less than a kilometre, and then you suddenly peel off down this tiny little tunnel, this little, Alice in Wonderland bit of bridleway, and that's it. And after that, that's when the kind of kaleidoscope of history starts, really. You're on these ancient drove roads that have been hollowed out over thousands of years. It's a Roman route, it's a prehistoric route. Old Sarum was basically Salisbury for about the 1,000 years after the Romans got there. The Romans occupied the fort. Then, the major monastic centre was built in there, and the church and the towns, and the town grew up in there. And it was only when it got too big that they moved it to where Salisbury is now. So again, there's just like each bit you look at, there's such a depth of story, and that's something we tried to build into the guidebook. So I would say, I think, definitely buy the guidebook, just because it means that you're supporting Cycling UK to create more routes of this type. But also, I found it really fascinating knowing what I was going to be riding towards, and you really appreciate it rather than reading it sort of afterwards and going, damn, that's what that lump was. Or because, archaeology is a strange thing, especially landscape archaeology. It's quite easy to overlook, certainly when it's just mounds and bumps and humps. And it's almost easier to overlook on this route because there's so much of it. You know, some places, it's literally, if it was a Geiger counter, the thing would be screaming. You know, when you're heading north there from Old Sarum, and then you go up the valley, and then you start to turn towards Stonehenge. Literally everywhere you look is just loaded with prehistoric tumuli, earthworks, and all sorts of monuments. And you are literally, I mean, is that Catherine riding along there? I think, you know, literally following in the tracks of countless people over millennia. You know, and it's almost impossible. I find it almost impossible not to get caught up in the kind of wondering what their lives were like. You know, what was their little personal soap opera that was going on. You know, I really got lost in it. And yeah, so Old Sarum, again, another really, really important area. And it's quite interesting, you know, hill forts weren't around for long. They're only around for a few hundred years, really, late Bronze Age, early Iron Age. And then some of them got reoccupied after the Romans left, and some of them got occupied by the Romans themselves. But these massive monuments that are out there that nobody really knows, you know, obviously it had some defensive format, but most of it, I think, was just showing off. Like most things that motivate a lot of, you know, ridiculous buildings, a lot of it was just showing off. But, you know, they are incredible things. I mean, I'd say and then you get the other flip side to places like Old Sarum, which is obviously quite heavily populated. You know, there's quite a lot of people there. It's English heritage. And then you get other hill forts like Old Winchester or Avebury up you know, on the north of the route, where it's almost total isolation, and you're looking out, and it just, you know, it's properly otherworldly. And yeah, it's just a wonderful join the dots exercise. So I'm waffling on, aren't I? I'll let you crack on, Sophie.
But yeah, I agree. It's so easy to just kind of cycle past and miss things because you don't realise they're there. And one of the things that struck me and did live up to my expectations when I thought, oh yes, a nice ride around southern England, was the amount of beautiful, quaint villages that there are. I think this is Great Durnside or something. I can't remember exactly what it's called, but yeah, it's somewhere just north of Salisbury, and yeah, it's just beautiful. We ended up riding round and round here, taking loads of pictures because it was gorgeous. And
There's
then,
a lot
of
of thatch. There's a lot of thatch out there.
Yeah, and of course, then you get to the legendary Stonehenge, and this is quite an interesting one to illustrate the challenges of putting together an off-road route, because the kind of logical approach to Stonehenge is there are two byways that just go straight down towards it, but the unfortunate thing is you've got the A303 that cuts right through, which, if any of you know the Southwest, you know that's not a road you want to try and cross. It's single lane with almost constant traffic. And so we were thinking, oh, that's the one for the experience of riding straight up to Stonehenge. But a lot of people aren't going to want to do that. It's, you know, it's a bit of a take your life in your hands thing. So the official route that we've gone for is kind of a safer one that goes around beneath the subway and then loops back around to Stonehenge. But in the printed guide, we do give you the option. You know, we've got some bits where there is an alternative route that you can choose to take. But yeah, it's one of those where you've got to kind of bear in mind which decision you want to make.
Yeah, because just to make it clear, I did it I met up with a couple of people en route, and I tended to do sort of the bonus extras. Kieran loaded my GPX file up with the sort of extra bits. So I did the bit where you come into Stonehenge from the south, which is a bit more of an awkward crossing on the 303. Did you do the one from the roundabout, Sophie?
Yeah, we tended to do kind of most of the default options, and yeah, that kind of it definitely feels like the safer crossing, and you can still see Stonehenge, but not quite as close up as you do in this.
Yeah, the push. If you do fancy doing the diversion one, there's a bit of a walk between two gates. It's literally about 200 meters, just because it's a footpath, not a bridle way. Because obviously, you know, Kieran has to work, and the route finders have to work with what's legally allowed. So there is a bit of a walk, but like I say, that's one section of it that's absolutely humming with archaeology as you come over there. You know, so many barrow cemeteries. You know, thousands and thousands and thousands of years of archaeology up there, and also, you know, and Stonehenge is, of course, a classic example of how the landscape is, you know, even our understanding of such an old landscape is developing all the time. Because just when we published the route, they'd suddenly found out that it was at the centre of a massive pit circle arrangement. Stonehenge itself is only a very, very small part of the whole prehistoric landscape in that area. You got the avenue that you cross, which is 1,000 years earlier than Stonehenge, this massive long ditch and bank alignment just north of Stonehenge. And now they found what they thought were just isolated ponds, but turn out to be, I can't remember the exact figure, but it's like several kilometres in diameter. This huge sort of, well, and another meeting point on an even bigger scale. And the joy of archaeology is they're constantly finding more and more things, and so the route is developing all the time, even though it's already that old.
Yeah, that was pretty exciting when we heard about that. And then you kind of get another complete contrast, because you roll over to Salisbury Plain, which is all military training land, and our route skirts around a route called the Imber Range Perimeter Path. So you don't actually go into the firing range as long as you stay on the path, and that's open all the time and you're fine. But as you see, there are quite a lot of the signs and tanks and red flags. So the obvious safety message here is, if you see the red flag, don't go that way, because they will be firing and you don't want to be the target for that. But when they're not firing, it's just incredibly peaceful and empty, and just all this wildlife and birds that you can hear, and it's quite amazing, isn't it, Guy?
Yeah, again, yeah, and because the army are there, most of the army are there quite infrequently. I mean, you've got to keep your wits about you in case something weighing 70 tons with very limited vision comes thundering past you. They are normally escorted by Land Rovers, but be careful where you stop for a picnic, and don't wander too far off. Don't wander off the tracks either, and don't pick up any interesting mementos, because they might go bang. I think, we have to be very careful about the wording of the guidebook in that area. And also, I was expecting Salisbury Plain to just be kind of relatively barren pampas grass. I thought it'd just be all the same, but there's actually a real diversity of landscape even there as you cross it. I mean, there are the kind of big, almost Patagonia style sort of tank ranges towards the south, but then you get into quite a lot of sort of rural agricultural land as you go north, and then there's little detours you can take off to Imber itself is open occasionally, which is a village that was abandoned. Well, it wasn't abandoned. The villagers were told to leave so they could use it for D-Day training, and they were told they could come back in about 6 months' time, and they've never been allowed back. They still use it for training. And then there's also another isolated village where they shot they've shot war films up there and things like that. They shot 1917 there, I think, a couple of summers ago. So there's just,
and that's the one that was purpose built, isn't it?
Yeah,
that's really weird, because I've ridden around the whole Imber Perimeter Path, and you can see this village called Cope Hill Down, and it just looks so fake and manufactured and eerie, because it was just purpose built as a training village. It's a very odd place.
Oh, and have a cup of tea. That's one thing I'd say on Salisbury Plain. It's a long time between cups of tea. Is that there's a garage, but it only serves coffee. So if you pass,
yes, I remember actually this descent. I think we were getting to the point where we were like, "Oh, come on, yeah, keep going down, and then we'll get to a cafe at the bottom." The reason I picked this one is because right on the hill, you might not be able to see it especially if you're looking at it on a small screen. So apologies for that. But there is a tiny white speck, which is a white horse on the hillside, which is obviously quite a famous thing in this part of the world. So there are quite a few that you get the opportunity to see, which is quite exciting.
And those descents, when I did them, were absolutely loaded with butterflies. So I had to tiptoe down very, very carefully. I must have been in peak butterfly season. But also that's a nice, it's a nice part of the rhythm of the route. You go over these sort of, Salisbury Plain, you rise up over the top of it, and then you drop down, and you have a little break across the river valley there, and then you climb up again and over to here, which is Avebury.
Yeah, and this was amazing, because I'd never actually heard of Avebury Stone Circle before. Everybody's heard of Stonehenge, but this is actually another part of the World Heritage Site, and it's huge. It's a stone circle that's got the village of Avebury inside it, and it's a lot more relaxed than Stonehenge. You can just walk around among the stones and have a look. And then there's just such a sense of awestruck, kind of awe-inspiring as you stand and look at it. And you had a bit of a moment there, Guy, didn't you?
Oh yeah, I had found a cup of tea, and B, yeah, I definitely had a moment, because Stonehenge is a bit weird. It's a bit, obviously it's an iconic monument, but it is a bit sort of touristy. just because it's, you know, it needs to be protected to a certain extent by, you know, just because of sheer visitor numbers. Whereas Avebury, the stones only got put back up in the 30s. You know, the area was bought by a local, you know, a keen businessman, and sort of went, because the old church during the medieval period weren't right keen on standing stones lying about, so they'd knocked them all over, and some of them being used, and they were just kind of, the place was just, if you look at pictures of it from like the early 1930s or late 1920s, it's just sort of a derelict bit of heathland really, with a big bank all the way around it. But now they're popped back up, and you've got 3 stone circles there, and then again there's, you know, there's Silbury Hill and other monuments, and, you know, avenues leading on and off it. So again, but just being able to go in, like you say, to actually go in amongst the stones and just, there is a, you know, obviously, you know, what you find spiritual and don't is entirely up to you, but you do feel there is something really, really special there. You know, it's obviously meant so much to the people who've, you know, created it in the first place. And then you straight off from there, you know, literally you pop out of there, and then you're onto one of King Alfred's military ways, the Hare Path, over onto the Ridgeway.
Yeah, and another contrast again. So yeah, all of a sudden you're back up on the ridge, and yeah, going back to what Guy was saying about Old Sarum and how that's quite busy and gets lots of visitors, then you come up to here to Barbary Castle, and this just has, you know, the bridleway goes straight through it. You could just ride through the middle of through the entrance and into the centre, and this is one of the ones that it is quite empty, and it's just huge, and it really gets you start to imagine, you know, people lived in the middle of this was their village, and yeah, it's quite amazing.
Yeah, that was another moment. You know, it's quite comedy because it's a fair old climb up there. But I mean, I can't imagine there are many cycle routes anywhere in the world where you get to reenact the storming of an Iron Age rampart on your bike. Luckily, without people firing slings at you.
Yeah, the whole of the Ridgeway. We were very fortunate to have a gorgeous day for part of the Ridgeway. I think we started on it the previous evening and it was a bit wet, but yeah, the next morning, gorgeous sunshine, and the views are just amazing because you're right up on the top for miles and miles, and it was pretty spectacular. Oh, and this was an interesting part in my trip, that we were just riding along, and then all of a sudden there's this kind of helicopter just hovering near us, which very kindly sort of moved away a bit while we cycled past so that it wouldn't completely blow us all over, and then came back in a bit. But it's just one of those strange moments that you remember.
Yeah, well, they love playing. I mean, it's quite boring generally flying around looking. I mean, you know, your role as a helicopter pilot. Ironically, when I was an archaeologist, they used to love us because, of course, we were a bunch of idiots in military fatigues hiding in trenches that we dug. So we regularly used to, especially when I was digging in East Yorkshire, we used to get the helicopters and attack planes sort of loitering, waiting to use the ranges off Lincolnshire, and they loved pretending to shoot us. You're just slightly wary that they do keep their fingers clear of the trigger, but yeah, you might cause some interest. And when we went through, we nearly got a stick of paratroopers dropped on us. We just missed them, unfortunately, because Russ was dying to get a picture, but they were all kind of wandering down the trail with their parachutes under their arms. So yeah, but again, you know, there you are on your Bronze Age 4 foot 8.5 width regulation kart track under a state-of-the-art Lynx anti-tank helicopter. You know, I think that sums up the kind of appeal of the route quite beautifully, really.
Yeah, all the contrasts. And then, yes, as another contrast, you drop down into Goring, which that was a great fun descent, although there are a few little speed humps that you don't notice.
Oh,
until
yes.
the last minute,
yeah.
And lots of punctures. And then you get onto the Thames path, and I thought, oh, this will be quite nice and relaxing. It'll just be flat along the river, and it's not flat at all.
No,
So yes, this is the part with the famous steps.
Yeah.
Which Guy managed to ride straight up. I don't know how, but
I got lucky. And I had a very light bike with a wide range gear set on it. And yeah, Anna, who I was riding with, cursed me and nearly got up it. But yeah, that's probably the aim. There's another one. That's probably the only most people are going to push it section, I think. And it's quite a shock. I just saw it early enough anyway. Enough about me. But yeah.
Yeah, going back to this one, I think this is a real highlight of the sort of more recent history that you find, because there's this whole GHQ line, which was the defensive line during World War II. So there's a whole line of these pillboxes over sort of hundreds of miles, is it, do you reckon? Just to kind of keep an eye on things and make sure that nobody was coming in who wasn't supposed to be.
Well, this was the last resort. This was once we'd fought them on the beaches, if that hadn't gone well, we were fighting them on a selection of canals and riverbanks to stop them getting to Birmingham. This was the last ditch attempt. And again, you're riding through this peaceful, quite affluent, very affluent area now, and all very well-to-do houses and things like that. But suddenly notice that little stone outside someone's gateway is actually an old anti-tank bollard, or you look through. This one's quite an obvious one, but it's a great game of I Spy for us older generation folks who remember I Spy before there was TikTok and things like that. You're just looking for these little details. And again, if you default onto the Basingstoke Canal, there's a whole line of little pillboxes and anti-tank traps and things like that you can collect in your little notebook as you go along.
Yeah, that's convenient, because we're onto the canal part now. So I can imagine a few people might think, oh, going through the middle of Reading, that sounds a bit of a strange choice. But actually, you sort of hardly notice, because they've got loads of great cycle routes right along the canals and the river. Sorry, but along the canals and the rivers. So it's very pleasant, and it's a good restock stop. And you come out just along these beautiful paths with all the little houses. And then, as Guy said, you do have the option of going onto the Basingstoke Canal, which is also a very nice diversion if you're prepared to kind of, go at a genteel pace and say hello to everybody that's walking past, because it can be quite busy.
Yeah, and also as you get to the base, if you are riding it, just as you're coming out of Reading, your GPS will go haywire, or mine did, because I had it on slightly the wrong scale. But there's a bit where you kind of corkscrew up and over yourself. So if you can't work out what it's trying to tell you, that's what it's doing. You just pop onto a bit of dual carriageway and then through the science park as you're coming out of Reading on the towpath, just as a route guide note there. Sorry.
I remember getting confused by that bit. So now we kind of go through Farnham, and then you're into Surrey, and another different world entirely from kind of the Salisbury Plain and the Ridgeway area. So I'm actually, this is my riding area, because I live in Guildford.
That's you on the front, isn't it, Sophie?
I pop up in all the pictures. They've already been complained that I appear in too many pictures. But yeah, it's a really beautiful area. Just kind of big, wide, open spaces and amazing heather and plants and loads of birds. Catherine, who was there in the yellow top, she studied zoology, so she was getting very excited about all the different wildlife that we could see. It's just really beautiful and peaceful areas. But then there's also the riding challenge of deep sand, which a couple of the guys that we were riding with had never encountered before, because they were from the Peak District. So yeah, it can just stop you dead, and you end up having to kind of push the bike through. Again, Guy just
lower your tyre pressure. Lower your tyre pressure and look up. That's all I can say. And watch a lot of Dutch cyclocross to get in the spirit.
But it is great fun, skittering around trying to stay upright. Oh, and then there are these beautiful kind of historic sunken lane holloways, which I guess, Guy, you might know a little bit of the history about.
Well, they're exactly as you said. They're just tracks that have been worn away by millennia of people driving cattle and wandering back and forth on them. They're the old motorways, really, and they've literally been worn away. I mean, you can see. I mean, I love that picture, because it looks like that's model people riding along it. Really, the sense of scale there, and that's exactly how I think you feel. I don't know if you agree with me, Sophie, but that's how I felt. I felt sort of so small, but so privileged, and kind of so in awe of all the history on this route. You've got these vast trees just towering up above you, and and just all the stories. It's like, who was walking along here like 5,000 years ago? Had they just fallen in love? Had they just had a fight? All these little stories, like I say, all these little soap operas that you thought about, from all these ages of history that have passed through, and you're just scuttling through them. And the irony is, there's probably a few kilometres away from that, there's a modern dual carriageway, which is the last place on earth you want to be riding. and yet here you are in this just beautiful bit of isolation, and it is remarkably quiet as well, the riding. I mean, certainly I saw very few people. I mean, you get some areas where there's horse riders and dog walkers, and that's quite nice to have a chat to people. You know, obviously say hi, be nice, be polite. You know, you've got 350 kilometers to cover. Don't bother hurrying, even if you're doing it in a wanna. And even if you are racing it, you know, keep your karma alive by, you know, slowing down where appropriate and being nice to people. But these areas, you know, almost it's in some ways more than the kind of historical sort of keystones, like the sort of highlight, you know, the obvious highlight bits like Avebury, Stonehenge and the cathedrals and pillboxes and stuff like that. It was almost this more mundane, just everyday history that really soaks into you, I found.
And I think this is also the really clever bit. If you can see that tiny map in the corner, you'll see it's kind of zigzagging around a bit more. Because I reckon, yeah, this southeastern corner is the really clever bit in terms of linking up all these tiny little bridleways and byways. And it really is, even for people who kind of live quite close to here and have ridden it, they're like, oh, I never knew about that little bit that you could join up. And it's really kind of, yeah, discovering things that aren't that far away.
Oh, it's fascinating. Yeah. I mean, you can spend 2 hours going about 5 kilometers as the crow flies, I think, at certain points, you know, but that's the joy of the route. So if you are, you know, if you do find you're running a bit late or you're a bit hungry or whatever, you know, there's so many short circuit options, and you can always come back and do them again. But yeah, it is an absolute masterwork of map reading. You know, I mean, there are great, you know, there's some great map developing, you know, things like Komoot and things like that are great for plotting routes and things like that, but they won't ever go into the kind of detail and ingenuity that Kieran went into on this route, I can assure you.
And then, yeah, all of a sudden we're kind of a hefty climb back up onto the ridge, and you're onto the nice, obviously signposted South Downs Way, which I'm sure some of you probably will have ridden bits of that and know that's again quite hilly. And this is the one I remember, Butser Hill. It's just this big grassy climb, which is I think the ground was dry when we did it, which is very lucky, because if it was wet and slippery, I can imagine it's pretty impossible. I reckon I managed to ride up until that very top bit where it kicks up a little bit. But yeah, that's a tough one, but it's satisfying when you get up there.
And you can see the sea from the top. Oh, sorry.
Oh, carry on, Guy.
No, I was just saying, and you get to see the sea from the top as well once you're up there.
Yeah, it's great. But yeah, the other challenge the South Downs Way throws at you, and quite often the bridge as well, is lots of sharp, flinty stones. So it's worth bearing that in mind in terms of making sure you can deal with any punctures, or you know, some people might choose to run tubeless or something like that. But it's definitely something to bear in mind, because it can slow you down quite a bit.
I think we only had the one, actually. Anna had one when I was riding with her on the first day on the Ridgeway.
Oh, that's lucky. I think between the 4 or 5 of us, we had probably about 4. I had 2 in one day.
Yeah.
But yeah, this is I'd also never ridden any of the South Downs Way, and I think the image I had in my head of this route was lots of this kind of green and golden and fields and very nice rural England, and you know, there was that, and it was very pleasant. But yeah, I kind of just all the other bits and the huge amount of variation really struck me. And then you're on the home stretch after that, after quite a bit more up and down. And we actually
don't think you're in the final furlong too early, I would say. Especially if if it's the end of the route, that last day is quite chewy. I wasn't expecting it to be that hilly, although the clue is in the name, South Downs, you know, the South Downs. There are ups.
Lots of ups as well.
Things your legs will remember.
But yeah, towards the end, we actually divert off the South Downs Way and come into Winchester a slightly different route, which I think Kieran made a good decision here, because you end up going through the nature reserve around St Catherine's Hill, which is another old fort, and you get this kind of beautiful view over Winchester, and then dropping down this fun little single track bit and through this lovely nature reserve, which just makes kind of a wonderful end to roll into.
Yeah, and then
of course
cycle path up to
meet King Alfred himself. So there we go, we've got to the end of the route. Oh, we're doing all right for time, we've got 15 minutes left. So yes, if you want to go and find out more information, it's on the Cycling UK website. Cycling Average Way, there is the printed route guide that is available to buy. And if you fancy getting your hands on that, then we do have a free route guide available if you join Cycling UK. So yes, as I said, I'm sure a lot of you might already be members, but if you aren't and you fancy getting your hands on a copy of the guide, then I'll post a link in the chat if you're interested in that. So it gives you kind of free insurance almost all the way around the world, discounts on cycle-specific travel insurance and various kit suppliers and retailers, as well as supporting the work to create more routes like this. So we've reached question time. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen now so that I can see. Oh, I guess the final thing we were going to say was, Guy, any final reflections on the route, and did it live up to what you expected?
I wasn't, well, like I say, I originally wrote it up on the 2D wonder of a screen. So, and being and being from, living in the Yorkshire Dales, I was not expecting just the diversity of landscape or the riding to be as fun or as hilly. I got a shock. Heading once I got south of Farnham, my legs were I was feeling quite chipper up to that point. I was like, oh, it's only the south, it can't be that hilly. But yeah, I learnt my lesson. I earned my tea breaks from that point on. So, I mean, all the way, to be fair, all the way from, I say, as you come out of Rowgate, Hindhead, once you start to ride up to Hindhead, you are properly getting some hilly terrain. So don't be too hard on yourself. Don't expect, to be covering the ground that quickly, because, between the surfaces and the gradients, it is quite slow going, but it's beautiful because of that. And again, there's some, lovely technical descents. I think you said you diverted around Old Winchester, but that was such a good single track descent.
I know we missed out on that by accident.
Yeah, I was filming it on the GoPro. There's a series of 3 videos which I put up to sort of support the guidebook, but it was so good. I got halfway down and went, I'm going to have to GoPro this, and actually pushed back up again. Which I wasn't expecting that. I thought, just like I say, I thought it'd be a really interesting kind of quite pastoral join the dots route, but it turned into a really, really sort of fun adventure. And because you can run it at any pace, it's an adventure. You can, literally, that's the nice thing about these kind of routes. There's no, you can walk as much as you want. You can, ride as much as you want. And I think obviously we're about to get into question time now, but I think one question that's been popping up all the time, and I think, sorry, someone's just actually answered it. Yeah, James has just answered it. Julie's been asking about bike choice. You can ride it on, I think a conventional road bike would be a push. I think you could get away if you were careful. You could probably get away on a modern road bike with disc brakes and sort of 32mm tires, but that's definitely at the sketchy end of things. There's a guy who's done it on an electric cargo bike with his dog. If you look for that video on YouTube, that's wonderful.
That's worth watching.
But it's certainly short enough to do with an electric bike in terms of the gaps between places where you could recharge. So that's an option. But people have been asking about questions about hybrids or touring bikes. Yeah, absolutely. Obviously, the narrower the tires you run, the more heavy duty they need to be. Someone's mentioned like Schwalbe marathons and stuff like that. Don't run your lightest, fastest gravel racing tires. I noticed one of the picture of the puncture being fixed there was on the fairly lightweight Continental. A lovely fast tire, but it's not designed to take an endless battering on flints. So I'd say if you're going for a gravel tire, something around 500 grams will probably serve you well. And the biggest tire you can fit into whatever frame you've got. But there are bits of it that'll be great on a mountain bike. There are bits of it that'll be great on a gravel. And gravel, it's optimized for gravel. But then gravel is such a sort of broad spectrum of bikes anyway. It can be anything from a race bike with tri-bars on to, I think one of your folks was riding with a steel Surly with racks for baskets on the front and everything. It's proper.
Yeah, he does everything on that bike.
Touring bike. It's fantastic. I think the answer to really is the best bike is the bike you've got.
I guess the one caveat I would add to that is obviously be aware of the weather conditions, because there were a few people who went out and braved it in November after we'd had, about 2 weeks solid rain. Yeah. And they said, you said this was a gravel bike route. We were like, well, I'd probably take a mountain bike if you're riding through floods.
Yeah, yeah, but or a gravel bike with cross bike tyres on. In some ways that'll cut through better. But yeah, it's England. Bear the weather in mind, and the more robust and the more capable the bike, the more insurance you've got is the bottom line. But the more it'll be a bit more of a trudge on the road sections, I guess. But tubeless is definitely a good idea. If you know what tubeless tyres are, you throw away the inner tube and replace it with sealant on an airtight rim in an airtight tyre. It's like a car system. So the sealant, the latex-based sealant normally inside, or actually, no, I'm going to get too technically, I would get too geeky. But yeah, if you don't know what tubeless is, ask your bike shop about it. It basically sets your tyres up to a certain extent to be self-healing in terms of punctures and sharp cuts. So, and yeah, Dave Birkin's quite right. Super glue is quite a good idea if you take tubeless. But if you go tubeless, take an inner tube anyway. Take inner tubes anyway. Whatever tyre system you're running, take inner tubes. Because
I think we've covered all the bike questions. There are a couple of questions about whether it's possible to wild camp along the route. So I'd say yes. If you're used to kind of being discreet and incognito, get there late and leave early, all the usual things, leave no trace, then yes, there are people have found plenty of places. I guess it's worth kind of keeping an eye out for water taps along parts like the South Downs Way, but some of the bits on Salisbury Plain and stuff, it can be a bit of a long gap between anywhere where you can get water. So it's worth kind of bearing that in mind when you're planning where you're going to stop overnight. But yes, there are usually places, provided you do it responsibly. A question from the guy from Canada. How does someone find paper maps for this? I've put the link in the chat to our page on the Cycling UK website, where you can then find the route guide in the shop. And in the back of that's got all the Ordnance Survey maps with the route marked on. So hopefully that's a small and light enough size that you can carry that with you as your backup. What else have we got? Lots of bike questions.
Yeah, I'm just answering the one about the Bob trailer and the dog. I'm nearly finished now. So yes, it's fine. Basically, I mean, people are asking how much road there is. I mean, there is a reasonable proportion of road, but it's nearly all very, very quiet back road. And the guidebook actually has little sections where if there's a busy road junction or something coming up, there'll be a little warning, because it is quite a shock. Again, you kind of get sucked into the isolation. I don't know if you've found this, Sophie, but you get sucked into the isolation of it, especially if you're riding solo. I did one day when I was riding with a friend, and then did a day solo, and then did a day when I was half and half. So rode with a friend for the middle of the route, and then rode solo on the end. And it's a very, very different experience. It's quite interesting. You get quite introspective and poetic quite quickly when you're just toddling along on your own in these wonderful areas. Whereas obviously if you're with a friend, you have a bit of banter and a bit of company, and they get you through the bits where you really, really do need a cup of tea, or, they'll just chat some of the road sections away. But so it just works on so many levels. I think, it's great.
Yeah. So yeah, a few more questions about accommodation and whether there are campsites or other places. So in the guidebook, we haven't pointed out all of the individual accommodation because there are so many options that it would have to add another whole chapter. But we have put a table at the back that's got a list of the towns and villages, and then kind of ticks whether they've got a hostel or a hotel or a campsite. So then it should hopefully help you go and look them up in more detail. Hopefully this will still be open after they've suffered through COVID. This is the sad thing, of course, but if we all go out and support them riding our bikes, then I'm sure they'll appreciate that.
Yeah, because you've had some really, really good feedback at Cycling UK from B&Bs and pubs and things along the route, haven't you, with how busy they've been?
Yeah, some of them
people using
have said,
almost straight away.
We had 15 cyclists in one weekend or something that were all doing the route. It's quite amazing, really. What else is there? Oh, there's an interesting question about yes, the potential tunnel at Stonehenge, and I've lost the question now. Yeah, heard the A303 is going to be tunnelled. Might the route be changed when the tunnel is built? It's an interesting one, this, because at Cycling UK we generally think, oh, we don't want to spend loads on building new roads. You want to spend it on cycle paths instead. But actually, this is one where it could potentially be a good one if they do stick the A3 in a tunnel, because then they'll change the existing road on the surface just into a kind of traffic-free route. So it'll mean that people are able to walk or cycle straight to Stonehenge without having all this traffic clunking on the background. So it'll be a kind of a much richer way of experiencing the World Heritage Site, and it'll obviously be much safer for this route if you're able to do it without having to worry about crossing the road. So it's one instance in which a big road building project could have a potential benefit.
I don't think the original route would change anyway. The route that you went goes near Amesbury anyway, and I think it would start sort of west of there anyway. So the route as it stands, the default route wouldn't, I don't think, change. But if they build a tunnel and you can come at it from the south, that would be, begrudgingly say that's an upgrade. Because you've already got the road protest site at Portham Down as well, of course, just as you're coming into Winchester. That was, if people remember, Swampy and friends back in the 90s protesting against the big cut going through there. But,
I keep scrolling past.
Yeah, actually, John's just mentioned that. I thought John was on about highwaymen. I thought he was on about Hindhead, where there's a monument to people, to some sailors who got killed by highwaymen, I think. But yeah, they were. I think he was meaning highways people. Yeah.
Oh, right. Yeah. So just see what you're talking about.
Yeah. Sorry, getting confused on the notes there.
I'm looking at the questions rather than the chat. Yeah, we've got a couple of questions about saying, obviously we've described it going around clockwise. Can you ride it anti-clockwise? I think we'd overall recommend riding it clockwise for a couple of reasons. Because A, for the wind, that then you've got hopefully the wind behind you along the ridgeway. Because we went a little bit too far along the ridgeway, turned round, and suddenly got this blast of wind and saw why everybody else going the opposite direction had their jackets on and looked like they were struggling. So it makes a huge difference which way you have the wind on the ridgeway. And secondly, because it was planned with clockwise in mind. So it just means that in terms of the kind of having more steady ascents and then fun off-road descents, it works a little bit better doing it clockwise. But, if it works better for you to do it anti-clockwise, then it's obviously possible to do that.
Thinking about it, most of the descents would be a bit of a stinker as a climb. Like, I'm just kind of rattling off in my head there. A lot of the ones would be a real fight, but they're quite a fun, whether the long sort of ones dropping down off Salisbury Plain or Old Winchester versus, Butts a Hill, it'd be a fun descent, but it'd be short, but it's certainly a lot easier to climb up that way. I think that's true all the way around. But yeah, I mean, you can, and someone else is asking, which bits they can do as a day ride and stuff like that. That's the beauty of it. There are so many access points by rail or by road, to jump in and off the route. You don't have to commit yourself to one big chunk of it. You can just dip in and out of it. And again, that's a great way to decide if the bike you've got is suitable for it. Just go and try a bit. And you'll soon go, oh, okay, right. Well, these tires don't work for me, because it's all subjective at the end of the day. But don't feel you have to outlay a huge amount on equipment or anything like that to do this. I'm sure if you read things you need to go gravel biking, there'll be some huge scrolling list of all these exotic bike bags and things like that. But at the end of the day, stout pair of shoes, a rucksack to keep stuff in, and some sandwiches and a woolly jersey. People covered thousands when it was the Rough Stuff Fellowship when I started, before gravel was renamed and made fashionable. That was it. You just it was whatever bike you had, and follow some old men across a field. And that's essentially what this is, but in a more modernized format. So, don't feel, the guidebooks are great for help, but you can still download the route off the website anyway. So, just go at it at your level is what I'd say. And there's so many things you can pull out of it, whether it is, trying to set a record-breaking time out of it. People were talking about that as soon as it launched. Or just dawdling along, taking a week, taking 2 weeks, however long it takes. And arguably, you're getting the most value the slower you go. Because you're almost certainly spotting more things and stopping and taking pictures or just sniffing the daisies on the innumerable nature reserves, spending longer watching skylarks or tanks or both simultaneously in places. It's a lovely resource. It's a great way of, bikes are a fantastic way of exploring the countryside whether it's rural back roads or whether it's bridleways like this. And it's a fantastic. I'm just want to say, thanks so much to Cycling UK for getting me involved, because it is. I think it's a brilliant showpiece of how great bikes are for enjoying a wonderful piece of countryside.
Right. Okay. I think I've got a couple more, and then we'll probably have to stop, sadly. So somebody has asked, is the route waymarked? So no, we haven't got signs for the King Alfred Way specifically, because that can then start off quite a lengthy process, because you've got to get permission from all the landowners on the route to put signs on the fence posts and things. But a large proportion of it does use kind of waymarked existing routes. So there's sort of 40 miles along, or maybe 30 miles along the Ridgeway, which is signed, and then all the bit along the South Downs Way is signed. And there are a couple of trails like the Shipwrights Way over on the eastern part near Farnham. So there are some bits where you can kind of relax and not worry so much about navigation, but then there are the kind of the little fiddly bits you have to pay a bit more attention.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the Surrey Hills trail, there's a bike trail on there as well that you follow the signs for, which is quite useful when you're struggling through the sand. There's little purple way markers or something like that. So just make yourself familiar with the bits that are shared with other routes, and it kind of piggybacks them along the way. There's very little of it. I mean, I would definitely recommend a GPS. That is worth having, I think, because there is quite a lot of twisting and turning, which might get frustrating if you're constantly having to unfold a map, especially if it's wet or windy. And if you can follow the little breadcrumb on your handlebars, that probably makes a lot more difference. If you had to invest in one thing for this route, that'd probably be the smartest thing, I would say.
Brilliant. Somebody was asking about the free guide. Can you get the free route guide when joining Cycling UK as a household? Link you posted is only for individuals. I'll pop my email in the chat, and if you send me an email, I'll get in touch with my colleague and check that for you, because I'm not sure. But the final question I thought was quite good was the map that was in the video had a dotted yellow line going up towards Wales as a potential trail. What's happening with that? So yeah, this is the exciting bit, is what's next. So we don't have plans yet for one going kind of all the way up through Wales that would connect, but there is a potential one for a route around Snowdonia National Park, which would be sort of 150 miles a couple of days. But then the one that's going to be kind of closer, and hopefully towards the end of the summer this year, is a route around Cornwall, right, western Cornwall, so around the Penrith Peninsula and the Lizard Peninsula. So keep in touch for seeing more details about that as another potential post-lockdown challenge.
Yeah, more cream tea fueled, that one.
As long as you put the jam and the cream on the right way around.
That'll be the question. That'll be the question. People will stop asking about bikes then. It's like, which is it first, jam or cream?
Right, well, I reckon we'll wrap it up now so everyone can go and have the tea. And then, come back, and Jack Thurston, the Lost Lanes author, is doing another talk at 8. So go and have your pancakes and then come back for that one. But thank you very much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed it. Thank you for all your questions. I'm really sorry that we didn't get time to go through very many of them. But yes, I hope you have a wonderful time if you manage to go out and do it this summer. Hopefully we all can soon.
Yeah, I'm just to butt in at the end. For questions we haven't answered, there's a Facebook page as well from King Alfred's Way, which is really busy and vibrant, and some great information on there. We're both often on there trying to help where we can, but there's some great people on there who seem to be sort of resident, offering really good advice for all, everyone from like your 24-hour racers through to your 2-week adventurers. So yeah, but thanks very much for joining us.